Now, one of the great things about the West Coast fishery is the ability to fish for crabs. That's right, with the right gear, you can actually cast lines out and catch crabs just like this one. Now, my favorite crabs to target are Dungeness crabs, because in my opinion, they're the best tasting, they're some of the most plentiful, and they're pretty readily available from local shorelines, all the way from the Washington coastline, all the way down to about Northern California. My favorite way to harvest them is using crab snares, just like this one. But you can harvest them by hand in the surf. You can use hoop nets, you can use crab pots, but if you have to be mobile like me, if you're shore-based, there's really no better way to cover a lot of water than using crab snares. So that's what this video is going to cover today. All the stuff you need to know about having a successful day using crab snares. Now, before you head out to the coast, there's two things you have to have on your person at a minimum before you even think of going crabbing, and that's a valid state fishing license and a crab gauge. No, a regular ruler won't work, a tape measure won't work, a seamstress tape measure won't work. You have to have a crab gauge. Now, crab gauges just like this one are super cheap, really light. There's no reason why you shouldn't have it in your pack anyway, and they're designed to measure the contour of a crab so you can get a perfect measurement to make sure that the crab you're thinking of harvesting is actually legal. Now, why have a crab gauge like this instead of any old-fashioned ruler? Well, the game wardens want to make sure that you're measuring the crabs appropriately, and there's really no better way to do it than with a crab gauge. Most importantly, these crab gauges have a contoured size so you can get an exact measurement of your crab. You want to make sure that your crab is within your state's minimum width, to ensure that you want to keep it. Another great thing about a crab gauge like this is it has a simple diagram to be able to distinguish between a male and a female crab. Depending on what state you're crab snaring in, you might only be able to keep males. In California, it's legal to keep both male and females. And one like this also has a straight edge ruler in case you need to measure anything using a straight edge. Now, how do you measure a crab? It's really simple. I have a crab, a Dungeness crab here, and in California, you're expected to measure from the inside of the point to the inside of the point, not from the outside of the points themselves. So you take your crab gauge with a specifically designed contour for measuring, the top shells of crabs, and you simply lay it over on the inside of the point. You take, the first ear, insert it on the inside of the first point and drop it over the back. And this crab obviously exceeds the minimum keeper size for all states on the West Coast, Oregon, California, and Washington. If this crab was, just around 5 3/4, if this crab fell into this contour perfectly, it would be undersized. If this little ear right here hit the end, that would be an easy indication that it's a keeper size. Very difficult to do with a straight edge. You're just not going to be able to do it accurately. That's why you have to have a contoured production crab gauge like this on your person. Now, if a DFG agent or your local game warden comes along, and if they have any suspicion that you're crabbing, or if you happen to have a keeper size crab on your person and in your possession, you have to have a state license and a crab gauge to show that you measured it legally. If you don't, the fines can be pretty severe. In California, fine for the first offending crab is $1,000, and every crab is $100 thereafter. So make sure you have those two things on your person at all times, especially during the crabbing season, and that's your valid state fishing license and a crab gauge. Now, before we even talk about snares, let's talk about how you can be crabbing without even really crabbing. Let's say you go out with the intent of fishing just for the day and you don't bring any of your crab snares. Well, it's a good idea to bring your gauge, because if you're an avid surf angler on the West Coast, there's a good chance you've probably almost stepped on crabs like these. Dungeness crabs like to burrow in the sand, and a lot of times keeper-sized Dungeness crabs are right at your feet. When the crabbing season is open, it's perfectly legal to harvest a crab by hand. So, if you're fishing out on the West Coast and in the surf and these crabs are in season, if it's the right size, you can harvest it. So make sure you have your crab gauge on you. And personally, what I like to do is have a collapsible bucket in my backpack. I always fish with a backpack anyway. I carry all my fishing tackle and all my camera gear for filming. And a collapsible 2-gallon bucket like this really takes up no space. And if I come across enough keepers, I have a nice safe place to store them in. There's no better way, in my opinion, to keep a keeper-sized crab than in the saltwater it came out of, and it's really hard to do if you have just a backpack, a plastic bag. You really isn't going to do the trick. Their legs can pop the bag, or they can suffocate in the bag. So why not have a nice collapsible bucket like this? Putting water in it definitely forces it to hold its shape. And if you catch enough keepers for the day, a bucket like this is the perfect way to transport your hand-caught crabs. Okay, so you have your license and you have your crab gauge, and you're actually bringing snares out because that's what you're doing. You're going crab snaring. You're not fishing, you're actually going crab snaring. Well, you're gonna need crab snares, and you can go about it two different ways. You can buy pre-made ones from the store. Ones like this are pretty readily available at your local tackle shops, your Big Fives. These cost about $10 when in season, and they're adequate. The gauge of the steel, the cage is normally pretty good. The one thing I don't like about them is the OEM loops. Now, I upgraded the loops using a Weed Whacker line, and something to keep in mind, these often come with 7 loops, which might be illegal in the state you live in. In California, where I live, the maximum amount of loops you can have is 6. So if you have more than 6, simply cut off the extra one. That's what I did, but the loops were a little too small for my taste, so I upgraded this one by making 6 bigger loops out of Weed Whacker line. Pre-made snares are adequate, but they're also a little expensive. Again, this is $10, and if you miscast or if you snag, while you're crab snaring, that's $10 that you're going to lose at the end of your line. And that's why I go the homemade route. This is my homemade crab snare. I use a light gauge hardware cloth, Weed Whacker line, electrical crimping, flat bank weights that I get for cheap on eBay, bicycle tire tubes that act as a nice band to keep the cage shut, and the whole assembly. If I buy enough raw material in bulk, I can normally get the unit cost for each one down to like $1.50, maybe even $2. So for the price of one of these in store, I can make 5 of these if I buy enough raw material. Crab snares are something I consider pretty disposable. If you're crabbing, oftentimes you're going to find yourself in pretty rough areas. If you're fishing off a jetty, there's a lot of rocks. If you're fishing off a pier, there's a lot of pilings. If you're fishing from the beach, there's a lot of sandbars and seaweed that can bury your crab snare or get it tangled up. So for every 10 keeper crabs I catch, I tend to lose one. So I always bring enough, because I assume I'm going to lose at least one for the day. And losing a crab snare that costs $10, maybe $15, kind of stings. So I like making my own because 1, I save money, 2, I can kind of control the design of the crab snare, and 3, you get a lot more satisfaction catching crabs with stuff you make yourself. Now, bait. I'm a big fan of using a combination of frozen fish and frozen squid. I find the combo to be really effective no matter what time of the year or where I'm crabbing. Crabs really aren't picky. They're bottom feeders, and it really doesn't matter what you put in your crab snare. My opinion is that frozen squid and a combination of frozen fish works best. My theory is that the frozen fish, is the broadcast bait. It, transmits all the scents that bring all the crabs in, and the tough squid is ultimately the bait that the crabs have to work really hard for, and that's what keeps them on the bait cage. So you simply put, your 50-50 combination of squid and fish in the bait cage. Now, if you baited your crab snare right, your crab's going to be invested in the bait inside the cage. He's going to be on top of the cage for at least 10 minutes, or however the duration of your interval is. I normally don't wait more than 10 to 15 minutes, because if there's a hungry crab present, there's a good chance they're going to take all your bait. They're that good. So make sure you maintain tension on your crab snares. You put a little bit of tension on your line, and if the crab is there, there's a good chance that he's going to be entangled in the snare loops. You give that rod a hard set, and with any luck, that crab is going to be snared. And truthfully, sometimes the crabs aren't even snared and you can still catch them. Crabs get pretty aggressive when they're feeding, and there's a good chance that a crab's claw can be holding on to the actual bait cage itself. I call these guys stowaways, and when you're reeling in your crab, if you don't have any snares engaged, just reel real slow. You want to reel slow enough to ensure that the tension of the loop keeps itself around the crab's claw or leg, but you also want to reel slow enough to ensure that the crab isn't encouraged to let go. Oftentimes, if you reel just slow enough, the crab's still going to be feeding as it's being dragged in, and with any luck, he'll actually be hanging onto the cage as you reel him in. Sometimes it's skill, and sometimes it's just dumb luck. Okay, so you've decided you're gonna go crab snaring for the day. You have your valid state fishing license, you have your crab gauge, and you have your snare of choice. Now, how are you gonna transport all the crabs that you're gonna catch? Well, to me, that depends on two things: where you're going and the duration of your crab snaring session. You know, if you're like me, sometimes you have a limited amount of time where you can actually go crab snaring, or the places you're going crab snaring are hard to navigate, hard to walk, like jetties or, you know, down cliffs and stuff like that. If I'm only going for a few hours, or if I'm going to an area that I know, you know, I'm not gonna be catching a lot, you know, I downsize. Why bring a big bucket if you know you're only gonna catch a few? In my experience, a good day is maybe one, maybe two keepers per hour. So, you know, if I'm only going for a few hours, realistically, I'm only gonna catch, you know, maximum 3 or 4. So I don't need a 5-gallon bucket, and you know, there's no reason why you can't downsize. This is a 2-gallon painter's bucket. I call this my jetty bucket because it's a lot easier to carry. It's a lot smaller than a 5-gallon bucket, and if you've ever been fishing off a jetty, you know that it's, you know, super sketchy, and it's a big like game of don't break your leg as you're jumping from rock to rock. I really like my 2-gallon painter's bucket for fishing off a jetty or going to locations that I know I'm only going to be there for a few hours, and it's really the perfect size for a few keepers. You know, my buckets always have 3 things. One, a bubble box to make sure that the salt water that you know, I keep to keep the crabs alive keeps it aerated, a bait towel to keep my hands clean, and an old knife with a cork on the end to cut up my bait. Now, a crab bucket like this, again, it might look small, but you know, if I'm only going for a few hours, it's just the perfect size to keep, you know, a few keeper-sized crabs nice and healthy. And why do I suggest that you use a bubble box? Again, crabs, you know, burn through a lot of oxygen. One keeper-sized crab can burn all the oxygen in about half a gallon of water per hour. So if you have, you know, 3 keepers, 4 keepers, realistically, you're only going to have about 1.5 gallons of salt water in it. So to keep the crabs fresh, to keep them alive, there's no better option than running a bubble box. Bubble boxes cost about $10. They're on a 2D batteries, and in my experience, they last all day. I've caught, you know, 2 or 3 keepers before in the morning, not had time to actually cook and prepare them till the evening. So, you know, I put about 1.5 gallons of salt water. I run the bubble box for about 6 to 7 hours, and the crabs stay just as alive and kicking as the moment I caught them to the moment I'm ready to throw them in my pot. Okay, now let's say you're going for the full day and you really want to maximize your chance at limiting out. In California, the California you know, maximum keeper limit is 10 keeper-sized crabs. So let's say you're going out for the full day and you're really confident that you're going to catch 10 keeper crabs. A 2-gallon bucket definitely isn't going to do it. And that's when you bring your trusty 5-gallon bucket. Now, I know a lot of guys, this is all they use, and it's really all you need. You know, to me, it's a little much if you're not going the full day, but if you're going for the full day, you know, 5-gallon bucket is perfect. And just like the 2-gallon bucket, you know, I make sure that there's 3 things, you know, a bait towel, you know, a bait knife with a cork at the end just so I don't stab myself, and a bubble box. Bubble boxes are actually designed for 5-gallon buckets. The tube should be long enough to hang, you know, on the bottom of the bucket. And, you know, these buckets are really the perfect way of transporting crabs and will easily fit 10 keepers. This is 1 keeper, and you'll notice that there's more than enough room for 9 more. Oh, and treat yourself. Splurge a little bit. I definitely suggest that you get the top, because if crabbing is slow, or if you're just starting out, you know, not only will these keep the crabs fresh later in the day, but turns your bucket into a perfect seat while you're waiting. Okay, now let's say you're going to an area that's wide open, easily accessible, and you're planning on limiting out. You know, if you go to really popular places like the Pacifica Pier, Pacifica, California, you'll see that a lot of the OGs have wagons and dollies and all kinds of stuff to haul all their gear. You know, if I have all that time, I'm normally not gonna go that heavy. I'm still gonna go relatively light, but I'm gonna bring my fancy bucket. This is a 5-gallon bucket, just like the other one, but it has a pretty cool caddy. This is a CLC Wild River bucket caddy, and it really provides all the amount of storage that I could ever need for a full day of not only crab snaring but fishing at the pier. It has a lot of compartments, and you know, it has the capacity for 10 keeper crabs, and really I don't need anything more. I mentioned you'll see a lot of the OGs carrying around all their gear on wheeled carts, but this really has everything I would need for a full day of fishing and crabbing at the pier. You have big pockets like this that help you store extra crab snares. That's what I use mine for. You have a lot of miscellaneous little pockets for sabiki rigs, cool little slots like this, 2 slots in fact, for Plano 3500 tackle boxes. I use one for extra weights, and I have another dedicated one for all my pier rigging and pier gear for fishing. It has little slots like this one for hook removers, little hangers like this for extra bait knives, and it has a pretty cool dedicated storage pocket for a bubble box. You know, I keep my bubble box loose. Here's the dedicated slot. You simply hang your bubble box here. The 2 extra D batteries, when not in use, can be stored here. And there's a cool, you know, opening here that you can route your aerator tube through, up and over, and through the top here. Now, this top isn't stock to the CLC Wild River Caddy. It's a Frabill bait lid for a 5-gallon bucket, and I added it to complement the whole assembly. You know, keeps prying hands and prying eyes off my prize catches. You know, the opening is perfectly big enough to put a keeper size crab in, and these aerator tubes allow you know, oxygen to flow in and out of the space, and you know, you can route your tube through one of the holes here. It actually has some drainage tubes, so when I get home and I take the crabs out, you know, with the lid closed, I can simply dump out all the extra salt water and, you know, keep the crabs intact inside. Pretty cool. Oh, and I do a lot of product reviews, but I never outright say buy this or buy that. Well, I'm telling you, you gotta buy this. This is a Snappy Grip bucket handle upgrade. If you've ever had to carry the weight of a full bucket of water, a 5-gallon bucket of water, using a stock handle, you'll know that it's really heavy and really uncomfortable. You know, a full bucket of crab and water could probably weigh, you know, around 30-35 pounds, and all that pressure on your hand is just not very comfortable. Well, this Snappy Grip bucket handle upgrade does a great job of spreading the pressure, you know, on the inside of your hand and on your palm. It's something I totally recommend. It's worth its weight in gold. They're pretty inexpensive, and they do a really good job of spreading the pressure and the weight of a full bucket of water and a full bucket of crabs. Oh, one thing you might have noticed when I pulled up the fancy bucket, I have another collapsible bucket that stays with the fancy bucket that has a 50-foot length of paracord. This is my dedicated water retrieval bucket from piers. You know, if you're on big piers like the Pacifica Pier, you'll know that the salt water is generally about 25, maybe even 30 feet below your feet. If you catch a bunch of crabs, again, the best way to keep them fresh is to put them in the water that they came in and keep that water aerated. Now, how are you going to get that water if you're 30 feet above it? It's great to have a dedicated collapsible bucket like this with the length of rope. I know that from the top of the rail down to the surface of the water at low tide is about 30 feet, maybe 35 feet if it's a really low tide. 50 feet of paracord is more than enough to get your bucket down to the water. You simply tie it off to the rail. It's already pre-tied to the bucket handle. You toss it over the edge, and in 10 seconds you'll have you know, a full bucket of water ready to bring back over the rail to help you keep your crabs fresh. Definitely recommended if you're going to be out there for the whole day. Okay, so you've got your valid fishing license, you've got your crab snage, you've got your snares, and you've got the appropriate bucket that you're going to be using for that day. Now, how are you going to get those snares from the water back to you? Well, you're going to need the right equipment, and you're going to need heavy equipment. I like to use nothing less than a 10-foot rod. I know a lot of guys like to use their plugging rods like this one. This is a 9-foot Penn Battalion, made it to a Penn 4000 Clash. And you know, when the striper plugging season is gone, a lot of guys like to run these rods as dual purpose light tackle crabbing gear. And yes, you can catch crabs with this. Yes, you can bring crabs in for the whole season. But over time, in my opinion, you're going to be putting a lot of unwarranted stress on smaller reels like this one and lighter rods like this one. You know, crab snaring is very torquey and very gear intensive. Pulling in, you know, a keeper size crab like this one's about 1.5 pounds 1.5, pound and 3/4, puts a lot of strain on your equipment, and it's very possible that you might catch, 2, maybe even 3, sometimes even 4 crabs of this size at one time. Crabs like this are like little parachutes when reeling through the water, and you really need some heavy-duty equipment to winch those crabs in. And you don't have to go fancy. This is a 10-foot master rod. This rod is about 25 years old. It was given to me by my uncle. Probably cost him 10, 15 bucks at Big Five back in the day. And this rod is still perfectly functional. It's rated as a medium heavy, 25 to 30 pounds, and it does the job. It's probably caught hundreds of crabs in its lifetime. The original master reel I still have here. It's graphite. This is a Master 70S. Yeah, one of those OG reels that clicks no matter what you do. But I've kind of moved beyond graphite reels. This reel has probably caught hundreds of crabs in its lifetime. Yes, you can use an old reel. Yes, you can use an old graphite reel. The right ones will hold up. I think my uncle got really lucky with this one. I've been really lucky with this one. But let me tell you, crabbing is super abusive on gear, and I'm kind of done using wobbly gear and inferior gear, and I've upgraded. If you use graphite reels like this, they're going to wobble, they're going to bend, they're always going to be on the verge of breaking, and one thing you want is efficiency. When you're applying all that torque from your hand, you want it to transmit through the knob, through the handle, to the reel body, to the line, to the snare itself pretty efficiently. You don't want stuff really flexing too much in your hand. So that's why I upgraded this reel to a Daiwa BG60. This is a pretty legendary reel. If you're in the fishing game, if you've been in it a while, you'll know that these reels are pretty indestructible. So I put one on my Master 10-foot rod, and I fully expect it to last a lifetime. This 10-foot rod with this reel, it does a great job, but I have rods and reels that do a better job. This is my ray rod. If you happen to have a shark or a heavy-duty ray rod, those make perfect crab snares. Again, a full crab snare with a 5-ounce bank sinker weight full of bait. Could weigh as much as 8 ounces. So you want something that can cast 8 ounces pretty far. This is an Okuma Solaris 11-foot rod. I think it's rated 20 to 40 pounds. It's a heavy rod, and I really, really like 11-foot rods. Personal preference, 10-foot rods seem to be a little too small for me. 12-foot rods seem to be a little too long for me. 11 feet hits the sweet spot for my taste, and this 11-foot Solaris rod is a perfect combination of power and length. It's mated to an old school Penn 850 SS. This reel is built like a tank. It's got an 8,000 size spool, tons of line capacity, nice long lever, nice knob, perfect combination of durability and power. If you're looking for a more modern combo, this is an 11-foot Penn Prevail mated to a Penn Fierce 2. If you're looking for something more modern, this is a reel I definitely recommend. The rod is perfectly suited to the 6,000 size reel. It's a medium heavy, and it's actually not as powerful as and stiff as the Solaris, and that's actually a benefit. I noticed that this Penn Prevail can put a little bit more of a parabolic load when casting snares, and I can actually get more casting distance using this rod than the other 2 rods. This Penn Prevail happens to be my favorite crabbing reel, and I've gone through a few. One, it's all alloy, has a nice long lever, nice comfortable knob, definitely has a line capacity that you need, and most importantly, I think it has a much superior bail trip mechanism than the other 2 reels. The bail trip mechs on recently designed Penn reels like the Penn Fierce 2, the Penn Battle 2, the Penn Conflict, they just don't fail. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a miscast with this reel. And I really vouch for the Penn Fierce 2. It's pretty affordable. I think you can find the 6,000 size brand new online if you're lucky for about $50, maybe even less if you get really lucky on eBay or something like that. It's a part supported reel. You'll find a lot of spare parts online if you happen to break something. I've used this reel for about 2 years, and honestly, it spins just like new. And most importantly, I've never had a premature bail set that's resulted in a lost snare. So I have my Penn Fierce 6000, a BG60, and a Penn 850 SS. All these reels are in the 6 to 8,000 size. If you really want to go big and if you really want to go high tech, I definitely recommend that you go no higher than a Penn Conflict. This is a Penn Conflict 8000. The big difference between the 6 and the 8000 obviously is line capacity, but you get the added benefit of the much longer handle, the bigger knob. I really like the Penn Conflict's round knob. I'm a big fan of round knobs, and you get that kind of perfect bell trip mech design that comes with the later Penns. Definitely a reel I recommend if you want a reel that's going to kick some butt and pull a lot of crabs in. And what kind of line do I recommend for crab snaring? Well, this being my Crab and Ray setup, it already has 65-pound braid, which is perfect for crab snaring. In fact, it's a little overkill. If you have crab-specific setups, dedicated crabbing snaring setups, I recommend you do something that I call the braid top shot. What I do is I take 40-pound braid and I put about 150 feet of it on top of 20-pound solar collector green, 20-pound big game mono. What does that do? Why not go straight braid? Well, if you go straight braid, that's a lot of money. Braid isn't cheap. There's no reason why you have to fill your entire spool with just braid. You can actually, start it off with just mono, and the last 150, maybe 200 feet, you can afford to put your braid on then. Where I crab snare is often pretty crowded, and I found that if you have a braid top shot, you get a lot of sensitivity from the braid, and you get the bright glowing green from that Berkley Big Game Solar Collector green. It's just a great combo. I combine the two with an FG knot, and 40 pounds of braid is just about right. You can actually get away with less. 40-pound braid is going to last a few seasons. If you happen to have 20-pound, 30-pound braid laying around, it'll work, but those knots might only carry you for a whole season. So go 40-pound if you want something that's going to last more than just one season.
Now, another great thing about crab snaring is that you really don't need too much terminal tackle. All you need is a snap swivel and, of course, your crab snare. Now, one of the great things about customizing your own crab snares is the ability to control the length of your leader. Now, most store-bought crab snares don't have leaders, and what happens is when you tie your main line directly to your crab snare, there's a good chance with the current on the water, your main line can be entangled with the loops. That's why with my customized crab snares, I build a leader that's way longer than the nearest loops to avoid, my loops getting tangled up. Now, good crab snares are often bottom weighted, and that way you can ensure you can control the descent of your crab snare as it falls through the water column. If this wasn't end weighted, there's a good chance that the snare could fall on its side or maybe upside down, and the loops just aren't doing their job. With a bottom weighted crab snare, you can control the fall of your crab snare through the water column all the way to the bottom, ensuring all your loops lay flat, giving you a better chance of catching a crab. Now, with that in mind, you definitely want to use a snap swivel that has a barrel swivel. You want the crab snare to freely rotate as it moves through the water column. You don't want any twist in the line to dictate how that crab snare is going to fall. You can definitely use an old brass one. This is a 30-pound Eagle Claw brass swivel, and they work fine, but over time you'll notice that the clip part actually straightens out with the force of casting 6 ounce, 8 ounce, pretty heavy crab snares. That's about how much they weigh when full. Over time you'll notice that a simple brass snap swivel like this one will straighten out, and that's why I moved on to the locking versions. This is a Coastal Lock 100-pound snap swivel, pretty expensive. I think this one has a ball bearing in the swivel itself. These run about $2 each, so they're a little bit on the pricier side. I actually saved these for lingcod jigging. 100 pounds, definitely kind of overkill for this application. A nice go-between is a duo lock snap swivel. Pretty cheap. You buy these by the bag, pretty inexpensive. There's a lock at the main clip here, and there's a lock here, so it's virtually impossible, even for a 50-pound rated clip like this, to lose a crab snare at the end of the cast. A duo snap link is the best of both worlds. They're pretty expensive, they're really strong, and you can control the type of barrel that you add to it. Now, in all my crab snaring, I only tie one knot, and that's a Palomar knot, and I'll leave a quick how-to in the description below, along with a lot of the DFG regulations when it comes to crab snaring, because crab snaring regulation, like all other fishing regulations, change over time, so I'll update that description as needed.
So there it is. all the gear you could ever use for a successful season of crab snaring. At a minimum, definitely make sure you have a valid state license, you have your crab gauge on you at all times during the season, regardless if you're crabbing or not, because again, you might get lucky and be able to find a couple crabs at your feet while you're out in the surf fishing. Now, obviously, you don't have to go this far to go crab snaring. In fact, a $50 Shakespeare surf combo will probably do the trick, but if you want to have gear that's going to last you more than a few seasons, definitely consider gear at this level, if not higher, because if you want to have a successful day, there's no substitute for good gear. So there it is, crab snaring. Hopefully tips like this will help you get started. If you have anything to add or any suggestions, I'd definitely like to see them in the comments below, because any knowledge that helps me get more of these in my bucket is definitely a win-win. So why do anglers like crab snaring so much? Well, this is my favorite thing to catch and eat. This crab cost me $15 at my local market. So imagine limiting out and getting 10, that's $150 in your bucket. So as always, if you're interested in any of the gear mentioned in this vid, links in the description below. Any purchases made through those links directly support content like this. So thanks again for watching, have fun, be safe, and maybe I'll see you guys on the shore, or the jetty, or the pier, or Safeway.